Welcome to the Grow Like a Mother podcast. I'm here with Margie today, and she is a foundational wisdom root teacher, a transformational energy for life coach, and she focuses on flow and manifestation. She's also a medium and an energy healer and a mom. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Jill. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored with the opportunity to be on.
I'm so excited to chat with you. And I want to know first, how did this woo kind of work come into your life? Have you always been someone who's just been in tune with energy, or did it come later in life? Like, what's your story in that?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I had a pretty tumultuous, trauma-driven childhood. And pretty early on, I think around 11, due to, some issues that were coming up because of the trauma and things and abuse that I was experiencing, I was put into therapy mandated by my school. And I felt like that therapy made me really self-aware as like a teenager and like a really in my early adulthood. I'm 32 now. And in my early 20s, I was introduced to energy medicine. And my first form of energy medicine was Reiki. That's the first thing that I actually started getting done on myself. And so that was really, I would say it was early on. I wouldn't say I've always been into energy. I've definitely always believed in things beyond myself. And that I had a connection to that. I always knew I was a very like empathetic and sensitive person. But how that has transformed in my life through learning about energy medicine and through my gifts has certainly transformed the way that I operate in the world. So in my early 20s, so for about 10 years, I've been on this journey of energy medicine and self exploration and bringing it into my own life.
I love that. I love it. And I'm wondering, can you just get in the nitty gritty for us of what exactly is energy medicine? Because I've got some listeners who are woo and some who are not. So can you just ground us in with that sort of explanation of what are we really talking about when we're talking about energy and energy healing and medicine?
Yeah, absolutely. Energy medicine is a combination of many modalities. And so my mentor and teacher, her name is Lisa Ashwari Murphy. She's the founder of Swaha Yoga and Synergy of Sound Academy. She has learned many modalities in her lifetime. She's had a lot of downloads and transmissions through ancient and indigenous tribes. She's worked in ashrams. She, got a lot of information downloaded at a very young age for herself. And so working with her, she kind of brings in many modalities into the energy medicine field. So I don't just say that I'm trained in one thing because I'm trained in many, and then I intentionally learn things about certain modalities that I'm very interested in. So I started with Reiki, not with my community now, but that's because that was my entry point into energy medicine. That's a piece of energy medicine, but energy medicine is the ancient art of channeling. So it's connecting into that psychic medium power. It's connecting into sound healing. It's connecting into Reiki. It's connecting into hands-on transformational body work. It's connecting into holistic nutrition. It's connected into so many different modalities, but really she ties it all in, and I tie it in because that's how I teach now into natural law. So it's bringing all of those modalities into this universal natural energy, and that's like Bonpo pre-religion, the way that people used to live in unison with the planet and the galaxies beyond the beyond, and how all energy beyond human beings still works in unison together. So it's how the trees work, it's how the stars work, it's how the planets know how to move with each other, it's how the waves work, it's how the whales connect with each other, it's how the elephants work together in nature, and it's how they all work interconnectedly in their own little biospheres.
I love that. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of these natural laws? I think we've probably all heard of a couple of them, but what are your
you
favorites, or what are some ones that we might not be aware of that are working for us all the time?
Absolutely. Yeah. So most people know about law of attraction and manifestation because it's the most popular. But there's so many other natural laws that come into play and so many other principles that come into play when you're trying to attract something. So for me, my favorite law is the law of polarity. And this is really what brought me into wanting to uncover more and understand more about the laws and how they were working in our life. And it's really how I came to be a teacher of those laws, because I teach intro to natural law. And so the law of polarity talks about how everything has a built-in duality. And so if you think of atoms, atoms have positive and negative. And so often in life, we're pulling things apart and we put them in this bucket of positive or negative. We're labeling emotions positive or negative. We're labeling this positive and negative. We're in that culture of like positive vibes only, right? And so if you think of an atom, if it only had positive, it would implode or explode on each other, on itself. If it only had negative, it would implode or explode on itself. And if we're all made up of atoms, we have to understand that true balance and true power doesn't come from negating one side or the other. It comes from living in awareness and the charge of both. And so I, before being on this journey of learning about all of this, I was a very positive, projective person. So I lived and breathed that positive, toxic culture of positive vibes only. And that's not sustainable, right? Because you're trying to be up here all the time, and eventually you're going to come down, because what goes up must come down. You know, the pendulum swims left, eventually it's going to swing right. To have light, you have to have dark, because how would you know what the light was if there was not darkness? And the same is in reverse. So that built-in duality exists in all things. It's knowing that true power exists by the awareness and resting with the power of both. It's not this false sense of power being in either. And so in myself, being in that positive, projective people pleaser, like wanting everyone to be happy all the time, not wanting to look at those heavy and dense emotions because they were hard and there was accountability that needs to be taken if you're experiencing those heavy and dense emotions, which is okay. I just didn't know it at the time. Learning about the law of polarity made me understand that I didn't have to operate there. I didn't have to operate in that place anymore. And so that by far was my favorite law. That's what made the light bulb went off. That made me want to be on this path of uncovering and continuing to uncover, because we're never done. Healing is not a destination, it's a journey. And so that is my most favorite. But when we're talking about law of attraction and manifestation, people miss so many other things. So when we are manifesting something, most people are in a state of fear. So they're constantly on a loop of all of the, worst case scenario. What they don't realize is that they're manifesting from that place. They're attracting from that place. So everything that is living and breathing, and as humans we are living and breathing, we have a vibration. That's called the law of vibration, right? And so our the difference between a tree and a human is that our vibratory frequency can be changed based on what emotions we're holding. And so something very important is that emotions are just energy in motion. When we don't allow our emotions to be processed and flow, we're holding that emotion, and that therefore it changes the way that we're vibrating. It changes how heavy and dense our physical and energetic body are. So heavy and dense emotions are fear, worry, judgment, anger. Those are heavy and dense emotions. It's not to be judged that they're heavy and dense. It's just in an awareness that if we're holding those emotions, we are going to be heavy and dense. Light vibratory emotions are gratitude, joy, compassion, unconditional love, that place of freedom and peace. Those are high vibrational. Those are going to be highlight frequency. So things are attracted at a much easier way when they're going through that path of least resistance, because the path of least resistance wants to go to the lightest and freest place. Going to the heavy and dense place is really hard, right? It's really hard to get through all of that, that dense energy when you're trying to attract something. So understanding that your own vibration is a part of that factor when you're manifesting things. And then through the law of cause and effect, you have to understand that your thoughts, your beliefs, your morals, your habits, your values also affect what your external reality is going to look like. So if you're trying to attract $1 million and you don't actually believe you're worthy of $1 million, even if you attract $1 million, it's going to leave just as quickly as it came, or you're not going to be satisfied or happy. You're always going to be left wanting more, because you're not in a place where you're actually receiving the energy of what you're asking for, because you're looking to the next thing. So understanding that attraction and manifestation is working in our lives all the time, every day. We just aren't aware of it because we aren't looking at it that way. We're looking at it of like, oh, well, I'm saying I want to be a yoga teacher, or I'm saying I want $1 million. I'm just going to attract and manifest it and it's going to come. But we also have to take action to align ourselves with that version of ourselves that is going to actually attract that thing that we're calling in. And then the universe and the energy through the law of rhythm and the law of vibration, it does the rest. But you have to understand all of those things to understand how to attract things that are going to be sustainable.
Okay. I'm so glad that you are here today because I've done a lot of learning about this, and this is the most succinct, digestible way I've ever heard anyone explain it. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Even as someone who like understands and knows and puts it into practice, that was hugely helpful to really make it, I don't know, understandable. So thank you for that. That is fantastic. I am curious about like if you can tell us how, if we're supposed to be sitting with the heavy stuff, working through it, not being afraid of it, not judging it in this law of polarity, in that heavy, dense stuff, how can we use that in our manifesting? Or do we have to sort of like hold on the manifesting, deal with this stuff, and then come back to it? What does that look like with the two together?
Wow, that is a wonderful question. So the thing is that life is always going to be happening. Triggers are always going to happen. So you don't put your manifestations on hold just because you're dealing with something. You just, when an emotion comes in, right, it usually triggers some sort of story, right? You're like, oh, I'm angry. It's triggering all these looping thoughts of anger, right? And then that anger grows. And so instead of processing the actual trigger of why we were angry, we get stuck in those stories, right? We're stuck in that story, and then the anger is growing, and we're actually, instead of processing it, we're getting stuck. That's one way that the world typically tends to go. Or the anger comes in, we don't want to deal with it, so we push it away, right? It's still not being dealt with. It's still there. It's still being held because we're not processing the trigger. And so our body is keeping score. Our body is holding on to that. Those are the two worldly ways in which it typically happens. I want this third choice of when the anger comes in and we're practicing the pause, understanding our trigger. We're not getting swept up in the story that comes in with it. We're understanding ourselves. We're being curious with that place of lens of compassion, because true compassion is not, is not a suffering with, it's a liberation of suffering. It's that love in action. So we're experiencing that compassion for ourselves, that the anger came in, understanding why the anger came in, and not letting that monkey mind, that separate place, kind of like take us away from the actual emotion. We can process all things in that place. And if we, and the really cool thing is that no matter how much you've been on the journey, how much work you're doing, there's still going to be times when you go into those stories. It's all about not judging when that happens. The manifestations are still going to be happening because we make those intentions with our higher self, which is connected into our heart, which is connected into our true essence. And so we don't leave those when we might step into the other, right? Those are still there. And when we come back to ourselves, those manifestations are still there. So we don't have to put it on pause just because we're experiencing something. We have to allow ourselves to experience it and understand ourselves with that sense of curiosity and childlike wonderment of like, cool, now I get to go deeper with myself. Now I get to understand myself more. And that's cool because when we understand ourselves more, we can offer that understanding to others too. So kind of changing the way we're operating when those heavy and dense things are happening and when we're triggered, because life is always going to happen around us and those things are always going to happen. And we get the free will of how we're going to respond to it.
Yeah. What kind of work do you do with people when they are experiencing this sort of stuckness and they're not able to or aware of yet how to work through it or how to get to a place where they can objectively look at it? Like when the energy is stuck in the body, what kind of things do you do with your clients?
Yeah, so I do a combination of things. It really is also really dependent and resonant to each person's field, because sometimes I work with clients who don't actually like sound or maybe don't want to be touched as much. And sometimes I'm working with clients who like don't want to talk when they're on the table. So it's about working with each energy field. But typically I'm using a lot of rhythm to help them come into a place of balance through that energy. And through that, when you're coming in with rhythm, whether I'm able to use instruments or I'm just using my voice as the instrument, bringing people into that rhythm and helping them come into that balance is when you can start to guide them to see what's happening. And the really cool thing is that I don't have to take responsibility for what happens when people leave my table, right? When people are no longer in a session with me, what they choose to do outside of that session is on them. I can give them all the practices, which I do, and I check in with my clients typically in between sessions and see how they're doing with those practices because it's kind of like homework, right? I'm giving you these practices to try outside of session. We try them in session, whether it's breath work, whether it's doing a mantra, whether it's coming up with some rhythmic music or a gratitude practice or journaling, or we're talking about, a rhythmic practice that's going to work for you, whether it's, going for a walk in nature, whether it's riding your motorcycle and having a meditative moment with the wind, whether it's sitting on the beach and connecting in with the ocean, or jumping on a trampoline and or doing a hula hoop. Those can all be ways in which we're connecting with ourselves rhythmically in a rhythmic way. And so when I'm working with clients, it's all about bringing that rhythm to them, allowing them to drop the seeds of awareness so they can come to the conclusions themselves. Because for me, it's not about telling people what's going on for them, even if I see it. It's about creating a line of questioning that allows them to witness themselves and then holding that space as they process what I've already seen. And so that's what I do when I'm in a session with someone. And that's usually supported by sound, unless someone doesn't like me playing instruments, and I have to just harness all that rhythm with my voice. And then I will typically do some light hands on, and then I also integrate Reiki into those sessions as well. So it's a combination of many modalities that that are working in unison to help bring people into that place where they can start to understand themselves.
Yeah, that's so powerful. It's like such a gift to be able to experience that. Do you do it virtually as well, or is it all in person?
No, I do virtual and in-person sessions. In-person sessions, I typically travel to people's homes and do them right in their home, because I also work in the entrepreneurship and business world. And so I very much work with teams and leadership development and bringing this energy in that way as well. So I do in session, I partner with other organizations to bring like sound and workshops to many other places in my community. And then I can also do those virtually too.
That's the cool thing about energy, right? Like it doesn't care about distance. It's just like it just
Yeah,
is.
it doesn't matter where you are in space and time. Even if you can't hear my instruments through a Zoom call, or through, if some people don't want Zoom, they just want a phone call.
Yeah.
Um, the instruments are still, the vibration and the rhythm is still benefiting you.
Yeah. And one thing that you mentioned earlier about the sort of the gift of understanding ourselves better through this work is that we can explain ourselves better to our loved ones. And it makes me think about our kids and how, if we learn more about ourselves, it's such a benefit to the little ones to be able to explain to them why some things trigger us or what's going on or why the rule is there, whatever, but also that they see us learning about ourselves our whole lives, not just like learning through school. And we can model that as normal and acceptable for them to continue learning, which I love. But I'm also curious, how do we take it a step further, and how do we help our little ones as they grow right from the get-go start to understand themselves using these types of tools?
Oh, this is a question that's music to my ear. So
Yeah.
I've got three littles myself. Well, one not so little. I have a 15-year-old who, I've been with my husband for 9 years. Came in with our relationship. We don't have them all the time. And then we also have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. And so my transformation, which also extends into my husband's transformation, because as you go on the journey, the people that are in your sphere typically either come with you or they fall away. I've been very lucky that my husband has come with me along on his own journey in his own way. And so for us, it's all about teaching our kids through doing it with them. So my mornings typically start in this way. Me and my 6-year-old, my 3-year-old's not quite there yet, even though she hears us do this all the time. We start with speaking our intentions for the day. So we're talking about our intentions, It's typically like, I want to be in flow today. I want to be grounded today. I want to be balanced today. And then we do chakra based affirmations. So I am, I feel, I do, I love, I speak, I see, I understand. And then we'll do some mantra and some singing as we're getting ready for school for the day. And typically there's dancing woven in there too, because we're happy and we're excited and there's music going and we're having a good day. Um, it, so teaching our kids and doing it with them is how we can start to allow them to understand themselves more deeply and have the tools to be able to use in their life when they're not with us. So, for example, my 6-year-old's in first grade. So he knows about energy medicine, he knows about meditation, he knows about yoga, he knows about breath work. Um, and so when he goes to school, he is using those tools when something happens at school, and I get reports about it happening. I get reports about him like reminding people to breathe, or like doing a mantra at school when he's being triggered, or something that happened and he wanted to meditate and he invited his friends to meditate with him on the playground. So those are the ways in which we can show our kids how to live this different way that we weren't taught because we didn't even know it existed. So and it doesn't have to be the same way that I teach my kids. It can be different for everybody, right? Like my husband isn't, meditating and doing mantras with us in the morning, but he'll teach my son all about like going on a rhythmic walk and connecting in with nature, and how he loves to connect with the wind and do a meditation when he's riding his motorcycle, and how music is really transformative for him. And so those are all ways in which we're teaching our kids how to understand themselves, is by they don't they're not going to just do what we say. They want to do what we do. And the best way that we can help them understand themselves more is by doing it with them.
Yeah, all of that. I love it. I'm curious to know because I've also got a 6-year-old and I've witnessed him doing some of these things as well. I haven't gotten to the point where I teach him any of these things, but I think he actually is learning some of them in school, which is pretty awesome.
That's
And he's
amazing. I love to hear that.
right, and he's witnessing at home, which is cool. And the other day we were playing a game and he's autistic, so he can get a little bit like jazzed up about winning and being first in games. And we were like, sorry, you can't go first this time, or like you didn't get the card you wanted. And he just was like, breathe. I'm like, oh my God, where did you cut? Like, where, how, who? Like, I'm so proud of you. And just being able to see our kids use these tools inspires me back again to like, it's a circle, right? Which I'm here for it all. I love um that we can just use these tools. And what I'm really sort of like piecing together as I'm talking to you is a lot of the things that I'm doing are energy work, and I haven't labeled them as such, which is so cool for me to be like, oh, actually I'm an energy worker too. Like, whoa. So I'm just having this sort of aha moment as I go through this conversation with you. I am so grateful to have you on the show today. It's not often that I still learn things. Like I'm still always researching and reading and exploring, but truly to like have an aha moment and learn something viscerally is few and far between these days for me, because it's sort of like we're all talking about the same thing, right? Um, so it's such a gift to take some notes and have some aha moments with you here. I, of course, would recommend everyone to follow along with you and get in your world. How can people get more of you and get more of this energy medicine in their day to day? Where can they follow you online and how do they work with you?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And again, thank you for the opportunity and the space to be here. It has been a pleasure to have this conversation. If anyone's looking to get in touch with me, I am Prism of Brilliance on both Instagram and Facebook. I'm on TikTok too. I'm not on there as much, but I'm also Prism of Brilliance on there.
Thanks.
Um, my website is www.prismofbrilliance.biz. All of my contact information is there. So whether someone wants to call me or email me, they can feel free to reach out there. I also have a subscribe form if anyone wants to get in touch with my newsletters. And so those are all the ways that people can get in contact with me. If anyone's interested in really, some of the things that I've talked about, or maybe some of the modalities that I've talked about, you can always look up the Svaha Yoga and Synergy of Sound Academy. They have classes both in person in the New England area and also online. So a lot of their classes that you can take through Zoom, no matter where you are in the world. So those are ways that you can get in contact with me. And even if you don't want to get in contact with me, want to get in contact with how to learn more, you can go there too.
That's awesome. I'm going to make sure all of those links are in the show notes. So it's super easy for people instead of having to hop on Google, they can just, as they're listening, click in, click through and continue this learning journey and this conversation. So thank you for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Is there anything before we say goodbye to our listeners today that feels important to share that we haven't touched on yet that you just want to leave people with?
As people are starting to really dive into this, I think the biggest piece that I can leave with you is that as you're exploring maybe the belief systems that you're holding, start to let go of any belief systems that limit you. Because the way that I work in the world is that a belief system that limits me is not the truth. That is what I believe, and that's how I work, and that's how I try to explain to my clients that if something is limiting you, any belief that's limiting you, that is a belief that we should be working to no longer agree with. So breaking those agreements with those belief systems that limit you.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.